I take one cruise a year. I have done so for about 6 years. It started as something my wife and I did together, and after she passed, I kept doing it because stopping felt like giving something up. I wasn't ready to give up. I go alone, I find a routine, and for the next 10 to 14 days, I let the ocean do whatever it does to your sense of time. This was my 4th solo cruise, a 10-day Mediterranean route out of Barcelona. I'd requested a cabin on the port side, mid-deck, same as always. Everything was familiar enough to be comfortable. My cabin steward introduced himself on the first day. His name was Marco, a Filipino in his mid-30s, the kind of quietly efficient person who makes you feel looked after without making you feel managed. He had my preferences sorted within 24 hours. Extra towels, coffee at 7 a.m., turned down at 9. I've had good stewards before, but Marco was exceptional. He was there every morning and every evening for the first 4 days. On the morning of the 5th day, the coffee wasn't there at 7. A different steward knocked at 8 and introduced himself as my new cabin attendant. He said Marco had been reassigned to another section of the ship. He said it with the practiced smoothness of someone delivering a prepared answer, and I noticed it but didn't push. Stewards get reassigned, so it happens. But something kept bothering me about the sudden change. The new steward was fine, professional, prompt, and I have no complaints, but he wasn't Marco, and the difference was noticeable in small ways that added up over the following days. On the 6th day, I was walking back to my cabin from dinner and noticed the cleaning closet next to my cabin was slightly open. The light inside was on, and I wouldn't have looked twice, except that a small notebook was visible on the shelf just inside the door, sitting on top of a folded uniform in a way that suggested it had been left in a hurry. I looked down the corridor. It was empty, so I reached in and took the notebook. I know that was wrong, but something about the way it was sitting there like it had been left for someone to find made me take it. Back in my cabin, I opened it and found out it was Marco's. I know this because his name was written inside the front cover. The entries were in a mix of English and Tagalog, but enough of it was in English that I could follow the general shape of it. Most of the early entries were ordinary notes about passengers, reminders, personal observations, the kind of things someone writes to process a long working day. Then the entries changed about 2 weeks before the cruise departed. He'd seen something on a previous voyage that he couldn't account for. He was vague about the specifics, deliberately vague, like he was aware someone might read it, but the shape of it was clear enough. Something was being moved through the ship's lower cargo hold that wasn't on any manifest, and he'd seen it by accident during an off-hours maintenance issue that took him below his usual working deck. He'd told someone, a senior crew member he trusted. The last entry was dated the night before the cruise departed Barcelona. It said the person he'd told had advised him to say nothing and forget what he'd seen. It said he wasn't sure he could do that, and he was going to see what happened on this voyage before deciding what to do next. There were no entries after that. I sat with that notebook for a long time. Then I thought about what the replacement steward had said, that Marco had been reassigned to another section. Not that he'd left the ship, not that he'd taken leave, but reassigned, still on board somewhere. In a ship carrying over 3,000 people, reassigned to a different section meant he could be anywhere, and I'd never know it. I went to guest services the following morning and asked about Marco by name. I said he'd been my steward, and I wanted to pass along a compliment. The woman at the desk typed his name into the system and looked at her screen for a moment longer than felt natural. She said there was no crew member by that name registered on the current voyage. I said he'd been my steward for the first 3 days. I described him. She smiled and said there must be some confusion and asked if there was anything else she could help me with. I got off that ship in Barcelona 9 days after I boarded, and I have not been on a cruise since. I still have the notebook. I've thought about what to do with it more times than I can count. Who to give it to, whether it would matter, and whether Marco is somewhere that giving it to someone would help him. I don't have answers to any of those questions. What I have is a notebook that ends mid-thought and a name that a ship system says was never there. If you're enjoying these stories, you can subscribe. There are more like this every week. This happened last summer on a 5-night cruise to the Bahamas. I went with my cousin Derek, mostly because his girlfriend had broken up with him 2 weeks before they were supposed to leave, and he didn't want to go alone. I wasn't his first choice, obviously. I was just the person who could get off work on short notice and already had a passport. For a little backstory, Derek and I grew up almost like brothers, but we were never really alike. He was loud, careless, and could make friends with anyone in about 5 minutes. I was more private. I hated leaving my things unattended, hated hotel safes, hated giving my card to strangers, all of that. So a cruise was not exactly my ideal vacation. Still, it was cheap for me, and I figured 5 days couldn't be that bad. Our cabin was on deck 8, an interior room with no balcony and no window. Just 2 twin beds, a tiny bathroom, a desk, and one of those little safes inside the closet. The hallway outside was narrow and always busy during the day, but at night it got strangely quiet, like everyone had disappeared at the same time. The first night was fine. We ate at the buffet, walked around the ship, and Derek got drunk at one of the bars near the casino. I went back to the room around midnight, and he came in sometime after 3. The next morning, we were in Nassau. Our plan was to get off the ship, wander around for a bit, maybe grab food, then come back early because neither of us cared that much about shopping. Before we left, I put my wallet, passport, and one backup credit card in the cabin safe. Derek did the same. I remember this clearly because I made fun of him for using 1, 2, 3, 4 as the safe code, and he told me no criminal mastermind was hiding on a Carnival cruise waiting to steal his debit card. Right before we walked out, I noticed something small and kind of weird. There was a folded towel on Derek's bed. Not one of those animal towels, just a plain white towel folded into a square and placed in the center of his pillow. I asked him if he put it there. He said no. We both looked at it for a second. Then Derek laughed and said maybe the room steward had a crush on him. I didn't think it was funny, but I also didn't think it mattered. Cruise staff go in and out of rooms all day, so I let it go and we left the ship around noon. Nassau was crowded and hot, and after about an hour of walking around, we were standing near a taxi stand, trying to decide whether to go to a beach or just head back. Derek was talking to a driver, and I pulled out my phone to check the ship app because I wanted to see what time dinner opened. That's when a notification popped up. Your stateroom door has been unlocked. At first, I thought it was a delayed notification from when we left earlier, but the time on it was current, 1:17 p.m. I showed Derek. He looked at it, shrugged, and said, "It's probably housekeeping." That made sense for about 2 seconds. Then I remembered our room had already been cleaned. The beds were made, the bathroom had fresh towels, and that folded towel had already been there before we left. I told Derek that. He said, "Okay, then maybe they forgot something." He wasn't worried at all, which annoyed me. I didn't want to be the paranoid one, but I also didn't love knowing someone had just opened our cabin while we were off the ship. We ended up heading back to the ship instead of the beach. When we got to the gangway, there was a line to board. It took maybe 15 minutes. The whole time, I kept checking the app, waiting for another notification, but there was nothing. When we got to deck 8, our hallway was empty, except for a cleaning cart parked near the elevators. Our cabin door was shut. Nothing looked wrong from the outside. Derek opened the door first. At first, everything looked normal. My backpack was still under the desk. Our shoes were still by the wall. The safe was still closed. Nothing had been thrown around or obviously touched. But I immediately noticed the TV was on. It was showing our onboard charges, which neither of us had opened. And on my bed, in the exact center of my pillow, was another folded white towel. Derek stopped joking after that. I picked it up expecting there to be a note or something underneath it, but there was nothing, just a towel. Derek opened the safe. Then he said, "Did you move my passport?" I said no. He stared into the safe for a few seconds, then said it had been facing the other direction. I thought that was a weird thing to notice, but Derek swore he had placed it with the photo page facing down. Now it was facing up. We went down to guest services and explained what happened. The woman at the desk was polite, but clearly didn't think it was serious. She told us stateroom attendants sometimes enter rooms multiple times a day and that the app notifications could be delayed. I asked if she could check who opened the door. She said only security could access that. So we asked for security. That took almost 40 minutes. When a security officer finally came, he asked us the same basic questions over and over. Had anything been stolen? Had we left the safe open? Had we given anyone our cabin number or card? Had we been drinking? The answer was no to all of it. The problem was, nothing was actually gone. He said they'd checked the door logs. He didn't seem annoyed, exactly, but he had that look people get when they think you're making a big deal out of nothing. The rest of that day, Derek tried to act normal, but he kept checking the safe whenever we went back to the room. I did too. Every time I opened it, I expected something to be missing, but everything was always there. That somehow made it worse. The next day was a sea day. We slept in, got breakfast, and spent most of the afternoon walking around the ship. By evening, I had almost convinced myself the whole thing was some weird housekeeping mistake. Then, around 11 p.m., we went to a comedy show. It was packed, so we stood in the back for a few minutes before deciding to leave. Derek wanted pizza, but I wanted to go to bed, so we separated near the elevators. I got back to the room first. The second I opened the door, I knew something was wrong. The room was dark, but the bathroom light was on. Not fully on, just the small nightlight setting. The beds were made, the towels were hung. Everything looked almost normal, except there was a man sitting at our desk. For a second, I honestly thought I had walked into the wrong cabin. He was sitting under the little desk lamp with my passport open in front of him. He had a phone in one hand, angled over the page like he had just taken a picture of it. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, had a short hair, had on a gray t-shirt with khaki shorts, and was barefoot. He didn't look homeless or drunk or confused. He looked like some regular guy checking email in his own room. He didn't jump up. He didn't panic. He just turned his head and looked at me. Then he said, "You're early." That was all he said. I backed out of the room and slammed the door so hard my hand hurt. Then I ran. I found Derek near the elevators and could barely get the words out. We called security and they came fast this time. 2 officers went into the room while we stood in the hallway with an older couple who had heard me yelling. A minute later, the officers came back out. They said the room was empty. I pushed past them and looked for myself. The man was gone. There was no balcony, no connecting door, nowhere obvious to hide. They checked under the beds, inside the closet, the bathroom, everything. My passport was back in the safe, so was Derek's. But the safe door wasn't locked, and on Derek's pillow, there was another folded towel. This one had something inside it. A key card that wasn't one of ours. It had no name printed on it, just cabin number 8236 written across it in black marker. Our cabin was 8237, so cabin 8236 was the room next door. Security told us to wait near the elevators. A few minutes later, more crew showed up, including someone in a white officer uniform. They knocked on room 8236. No answer. Then they opened it. The cabin was empty. Not empty like someone had gone to dinner. Empty like no one had ever unpacked there. No luggage, no clothes, no toothbrush, nothing in the trash. But on the desk was a small black device plugged into the wall. It looked like a phone charger. One of the officers immediately pulled it out and put it into a plastic bag. He did it fast, like he already knew what it was. That was when I noticed the other thing. There were 2 folded towels on the bed in that empty cabin, stacked the exact same way as the ones left in our room. The security officer asked us if we knew the person staying there. Derek said no. The officer didn't explain anything after that. They moved us to another cabin, 2 decks down, and told us not to talk about it with other passengers because they were handling the matter internally. I could barely sleep that night. The next morning, I saw our previous room steward near the elevators and asked if anyone had been staying in room 8236. His face immediately changed. Then he said, "No, there is no guest." He told me that room had been marked out of service before we boarded because of a plumbing issue. No passenger was supposed to be inside it. Then I asked if he had left the folded towels on our beds. He looked almost offended, then said, "No, sir, I would not do that." When the cruise ended, Derek and I got off the ship as fast as possible. The cruise line gave us a vague apology and said the situation had been contained. They wouldn't tell us who the man was, or how he got into our room, or why he had access to the cabin next door. About a week after I got home, my bank called. Someone had tried to open a credit account using my full name, date of birth, home address, and passport number. The next day, Derek got the same kind of call. That was when we realized the man hadn't been trying to steal our wallets and belongings on the cruise, but instead, he was stealing our identity. A few days later, Derek managed to get someone from the cruise line security department on the phone. They wouldn't give details, but they admitted they had found unauthorized imaging equipment in the empty cabin next to ours. The guy said it looked like someone had been photographing guest documents and uploading them through the ship's Wi-Fi. He also said our room wasn't the only one. A couple of weeks later, Derek sent me a screenshot from the cruise photo website. It was one of the pictures taken during the comedy show, the night I found the man in our room. In the picture, Derek and I were standing near the back of the lounge. A few rows behind us, sitting alone, was the man from our cabin. He had the same gray shirt and khaki shorts on, and he was looking directly at the camera. Derek paid for the photo so we could zoom in. That's when we saw what was sitting in his lap. It was one of the folded white towels, and tucked halfway underneath it were different passports.